Camden, Arkansas, March 2nd, 1957. At 11 p.m., Clyde Crawford would arrive home. What Clyde may or may not have known is that his wife, Maud Robinson Crawford, would not be there. The house was left empty and untouched, as if she just disappeared. And now, 67 years later, this small-town Arkansas cold case remains unsolved.
Amy, welcome back. Thanks for coming on again. What do you have for us?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Today we're going to talk about Maud Crawford from Camden, Arkansas, and her murder and disappearance.
I know about that. I'm from El Dorado, so I've heard a little bit about Maud, and I know that supposedly it's still not solved.
Unsolved, and no clues and no hard evidence for sure.
All right, so let's unpack what you got.
Okay, well, and I will tell you, I am an Arkansas historian, so I'm going to say this a little more historic-like than rumors, okay? Good. So here's the story. The story was Miss Maud Robinson Crawford. She was a lawyer in Camden, Arkansas. She also was the first female lawyer in Camden, Arkansas. Maud Crawford worked in a law firm in Camden, Arkansas. She had a very wealthy client that had started to show signs of dementia. So she became her legal guardian, and she oversaw all of Miss Roseberg's estates and properties. And there was some things that happened, some discrepancies, some things were missing. And so Maud Crawford, being a headstrong professional woman of her day, she started trying to figure out where her money was going and who would have taken it. And then all of a sudden, on March 2nd, 1957, Maud is home alone with her dog, who is a beautiful Dalmatian called Dow, and she is watching TV, sitting in her living room, snapping beans, which most of us don't even know what that is, but
I do.
She's tying the beans together, and there's little pieces of string everywhere, and so we're not sure exactly how it happened at that point, but then somehow somebody must have knocked on the back door. She got up and walked to her kitchen table or her dining room table and put down the bowl of beans. She then, the rest of it's a mystery, and she was gone. And this was about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. She did talk to her cousin about an hour before that, so that was the last person that ever heard of her. And she wasn't declared dead right away. She was just declared missing. And so this was 1957. She wasn't actually declared dead till 1969.
Oh, wow.
So there's all kinds of things of what could have happened to her. She was obviously kidnapped, and her husband at the time had been out for the night. Her husband, Clyde, had a strange habit. Well, we might think it's strange because now we all have Netflix, but he went to the movies every night, okay? And this was his habit. So he had been at the movies, and then he had went to the liquor store, and he was talking to people there, and he didn't get home till 11 o'clock at night. He comes home at 11 o'clock at night. He sees her purse is still there. The dog is fine, which was very protective of her. He wasn't concerned. And so he thought, well, she's just out. She'll be back in a minute. By 1 o'clock, she hadn't come. So Clyde gets in his car and starts driving around town, going to her friend's house, seeing if maybe the lights are on. Maybe she went out to help a friend in the middle of the night. He couldn't find anything. He actually pulled up next to a police officer and said, hey, have you seen my wife's car? Camden's a very little town. And they said, no, we haven't seen anything. And he said, do you think there's a car accident that happened? Maybe she'd been in a car accident. He said, no. So he looks some more. 2 o'clock in the morning, he gets to the police station. He files a missing person report.
That's what I was going to say. So
that's it.
Her car, did she have a car, and did she drive her car?
No, her car was in her driveway with the keys in it, which was her habit because different time.
Right.
And so her keys were in there, but her purse with like $147, which would have been like $1,500 in our day in the amount of money, was sitting by where she had been sitting in the living room no money was taken, nothing was taken.
So he goes looking for
her.
And
yes.
he doesn't call the police first or anything. He just
happened to see the police when he was out driving around at her friend's house, because I guess that's just how Camden is. And it's 1957, so there wasn't even 911 at the time.
Yeah, but still, that's kind of like today you'd be like, he's guilty.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know.
And there was
never
people
know.
that thought that. And Clyde was a different kind of person. He had been in World War I, and he had PTSD, yes. And so when he came back from the war, he never really could work again. And so he didn't really work. And she had set him up a woodworking shop in the back of their house, but she was the main breadwinner. She was a lawyer, and she made most of the money. So he would go around do odd jobs in Camden. Well, right after this, she's missing, people didn't want Clyde at their house because everybody thought he was guilty. So he lost work. He actually ended up dying without a lot of money at all because he couldn't have her income, and then he couldn't work much himself. So it was a sad situation. But 2 weeks, supposedly 2 weeks, the case was opened. So during that time, the people of Camden rallied together and started looking everywhere for her, any kind of clue. Nothing was found. After 2 weeks, the Camden police declared, well, we have no clue. We're going to close. There's dead end. We're not going to look anymore. So that was it. No clue whatsoever is what they said. So one of their police officers said, well, that's kind of not true. We kind of have this lady that saw something, and we kind of have this. And so he decided to go to the Arkansas State headquarters in Little Rock. He goes in there and he says, hey, I've got this information, but, my sheriff is telling me the case is closed. Well, and also we got to remember the sheriff lived in a rented house by one of the richest men in Camden. And so there was a lot of money going around. So there's a lot of speculation that her disappearance was all about money. Usually is, right? So he went down to the Arkansas State Police and he brought his files and everything. Well, they told him, they said, we hear what you're saying, but we know there's a lot of money involved. She was an estate lawyer. Who knows what happened? We're going to take you off this case. Don't worry about it. Leave us all your files. So he did. And when he went back, he said about 6 months later to say, what are we doing with this case? Where are the files? They said, there was a fire. And the fire was on this desk, and all your files burned up. But nothing else burned up, but just your files.
It's easy to say, looking back, today, saying, he should have had copies or all that stuff. But back then, everybody trusted everybody a lot more than they do today.
Yes, and you didn't have a big, $4,000 copier at your disposal either, And so he was just doing what he was supposed to do. But it haunted him the rest of his life because he was like, everyone says there's no clues, and there's not clues. Now, I have come and I've done a lot of research on Miss Maud, and so I can tell you more about her, or I can tell you the clues that they did find, but I want to tell you more about her because I want to tell you what a really special person she was in Camden.
Yeah,
okay. Sure. Well, so let me just give you a little background on her.
Yeah.
She was born in, I'm going to say it wrong, but she was born in Texas in 1897. And in 1911, she was valedictorian in Warren, Arkansas.
Warren, okay.
Well, how she got to Warren was she was born in Texas, and both her parents died. And her mother, her grandmother on her mother's side, she went to live with when she was only about 9. She was the oldest of 4 siblings, so they all went to Warren. So she's living in Warren. She becomes valedictorian of the 1911 class. So very smart woman. So at that time, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for women, but she did go to the U of A in Fayetteville. She was only there about a year, and we kind of lost track of what happened to her between that time and about 1925, because in 1925 is when she married Clyde. But we have to remember what happened really in that time period was World War I. And so there's not a lot of, we lost track of a lot of people. So we're talking about from 1912 to 1925, there's not a lot known about what happened, but again, it was World War I. So anyway, in 1925, on December, she marries Clyde. And then her name becomes Miss Maud Crawford. And so she goes to Camden with Clyde because he was from Camden.
Okay.
And she went there with him. and she went to a law firm and she became a stenographer. Well, stenographer these days, we're not even sure what that word means, but this was someone who was kind of a more than a secretary she was to the lawyers. Like, she was the one who drafted all their letters. She was the one who kept all the files. She probably drafted legal briefs, that kind of thing. So she was more like their word processor, basically, is what you would say a stenographer was. So she worked there for many years. I'm trying to make sure I get all my dates right here, but she worked there for many years. And then she's at the law firm of, I believe it was just the law firm of Good at the time. And, but then he had some other partners. So anyway, she worked there for several years and she decided, well, I want to be a lawyer. Well, back then, and for many, many generations before then, being a lawyer was different than it is now. And so all you really had to do was pass the bar. You didn't really have to go to law school, okay? In fact, a little side note, passing the bar is exactly what it was. There's stories of people who, if you wanted to be a lawyer, even back in, colonial times or anything, you wanted to be a lawyer, you apprenticed kind of with a lawyer, kind of like she was working at the law firm. So you would hang out with those people for a while, and then you would go to a bar, because that's where most people hung out. And the other lawyers and the other judges were there, and they'd say, well, yeah, we think you know enough to be a lawyer. You've passed the bar.
Oh, wow. So that's where that saying comes from. I
yes.
love that. It sounds to me like it's kind of like a contractor or electrician or something. They are understudy, and then they get enough information, then they...
Yes, it's more like a certificate. Yes.
Right.
So they did have law school though at the U of A up in Fayetteville at that time, but she's married and she's already had full-time job. She didn't have time to go to law school, so she applied and said, "I just want to take the bar exam." So she went in to take the bar exam with all these kids that had been in law school. She passed the bar, and she was the highest in the whole class.
Awesome.
So she was amazing. So when she comes back to Camden to her law firm, by this time it had become the law firm of Good, McClellan, and Lace, I believe it's called. And the McClellan in that is Senator John L. McClellan, who went on from being a lawyer in Camden in the same law firm as Miss Maud to the Senate. And
wow.
And that there's a little connection there for that. And so that's one of the theories that could have maybe got her kidnapped. But she was the expert in the office in estates and title research, okay? And so she was an estate lawyer, basically, and she was the expert in the office. So that's how she got involved in overseeing this Miss Rose Berg's estate, because that was her specialty. But she was the only woman in the law firm. She was the first woman lawyer in Camden, and this was only 10 years after the first woman lawyer had even been allowed to practice in Arkansas at all.
Wow.
So she was very groundbreaking in her time, but they said she was very attention to details, very organized, attention to details.
You'd want that as a lawyer.
Yes, and so this is Camden. Everybody knew everybody. And there was also we're going to bring this other part into the story when I start telling you the connections of the law firm. Yep. I told you about Miss Rose Bergs. Well, Miss Rose Bergs had a nephew named Mike Bergs. Actually, his name was Henry for his father's name, but he went by Mike Berg. And Mike Berg's lawyer was the lawyer Good from her same law firm. Okay, he had his lawyer. He did all his business there. This was the wealthiest family, and probably still is, in Camden. Okay, the story is that Mike and his uncle, who was married to Rose before he died, Mike's dad and his uncle started a thing called the Berg Brothers, and the Berg Brothers was basically, way back in the late 1800s, they were in real estate. They had all kinds of properties. So they just acquired all this money, timberlands. They even had holdings in the oil booms that were happening in Arkansas. So, but that was these two brothers who started from nothing and who made this fortune. Okay, so Henry's dad had died, and a apparently, of course, he would have got some of his dad's inheritance. But when his uncle died, Mike thought, well, I'm entitled to my uncle's inheritance also because my dad and him started this business. And they had no children. Rose and her husband had no children.
Okay.
So he thought all of the fortune would go to him and that he would be his aunt's executor and he would take care of her fortune as long as she lived. But there come Maud. Maud became the executor and the keeper of his aunt, okay? So Mike didn't like that at all. And the uncle actually, in his will, gave Mike a quarter of his fortune. Now, his fortune was, in those days, we're talking in the 50s, $20 million.
In the 50s, it was $20 million.
So imagine how much it is today. In that, but he only got a quarter of it, and it didn't make him happy.
$5 million.
Yeah. So the rest of it, the other three quarters of it, were given to Rose, the wife, because back then, the wife did not automatically get. Like if the husband died, she did not automatically get it unless the husband put it in a will, just because women were second-class citizens kind of thing. But her husband had definitely put, Mike gets a quarter, you get the other 3/4. And so Miss Rose, before she had became so sick, she had wrote up a will with Maud, her lawyer, the estate lawyer, and said, I want to take mine and give it to my nieces from my side of the family, not Burke's at all, but her side of the family. And I want my shares split up between these 3 nieces. And it was all will, and each of the nieces had a copy of the will. They were all signed. There was a will that had been put into her safety deposit box. All of these wills magically disappeared after Miss Maud disappeared. Okay, so that's important to remember. So this didn't make Mike happy at all. And so what Mike started doing was he would go to his aunt and he would say, hey, why don't we sell off part of your timber fortune? Or why don't we sell off? She had like 15 homes that she owned in Camden. Now, Mike owned several rental homes himself, but she had several. And so if you go to the courthouse, you see the paperwork that says where a very shaky hand, Miss Rose would write her name, and she was giving property and stuff away to people who worked for Mike Burks. But then sometimes on the same day or the same week, that employee of his would sign it over to Mike. Okay, so this was happening, and then there comes Maud, and Maud goes, what's going on? And she was getting drift of this. So the story goes, this is all hearsay.
Right.
But the story goes that there's lots of witnesses to this, that she knew what Mike was doing, and she confronted Mike. Well, before I tell you about the confrontation, let me tell you how close Miss Maud was really to Rose. Miss Maud lived in a beautiful white colonial home in Camden. Across the street, which is still standing, is Miss Rose's house. So they were best friends. They were across the street neighbors, and she had known her for years and years. So it was very easy for her to say, yes, I'm going to take care of my friend. And yes, I'm going to make sure your stuff is fine. Right. She'd even set up, because Miss Maud could not be alone, she had 24-hour nurses. Not Miss Maud, Miss Rose. Right. Miss Maud had overseen that. She hired around-the-clock nurses for her. She took care of her. She made sure she had everything she wanted. And like I said, she was across the street. So that's how close these were. This wasn't just a business thing. This was very passionate for Maud. So the story goes that she went to Mike Berg's office. Now, remember, he's the richest man in town, and he owns a lot of things, and he employs a lot of people. Okay, right. And when you employ a lot of people, you're their bread and butter, right. And people don't talk about you. And they don't, when you say we're not talking about this, they don't talk about it. So anyway, she went in there and she yelled at him at his desk and said, I know what you're doing. You've got to stop. And one of his employees said 35 years later that they had witnessed this. And as she walked out of the door, he said, I want to see her dead. Okay, so... But he owned the sheriff. He owned the police department. Like I said, the sheriff even lived in one of his rental homes, the sheriff that was supposedly investigating this for 2 weeks. So
2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and then we don't have any clues. So back to the story, back to the night she disappeared. She had this large Dalmatian dog, beautiful picture of it. The dog's name was Dow, kind of probably Dalmatian probably. But this was known as kind of a vicious dog, and the dog bit everybody. Clyde showed, years later, Clyde said, I have scars on my arm from this dog. He bit me. He bit the paper boy. He bit anybody who came to Maud's house to work or anything. He was known to protect her at all cost. Okay. So how did somebody get in her house and kidnap her if she didn't know him, or if she got upset, or if she was, dragged out or whatever? How did that happen without the dog being upset?
Maybe she just walked out herself.
That's the story. So it goes to, she probably knew who knocked on her back door.
Yeah, but the dog.
And the dog, she probably told the dog, I'm fine, I'll be back in a minute.
That's
and
what
the
I
dog
think.
was fine.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. She walked out the door.
On her own.
On her own will.
Not in distress. Because even Clyde said, when he came home, the dog's just laying in the middle of the living room.
Right.
And he's like, where's
panic.
Maud? He
Right.
said, I straight said, where's Maud? And he wasn't panicked or upset or anything. So across the street at Miss Rose's house, though, at the same time this was happening, one of her nurses happened to be looking out the window. And it was dark, but she was looking out the window. She saw a big black car with lots of chrome, is how she describes it, probably a Cadillac, pull up into Miss Maud's driveway. Well, the house is set where the driveway's on the side, and then you kind of curve around to the back, and you're parking your car in the back where nobody can see it from the street. And that's also where Miss Maud's car was parked. And everyone knocked on the back door. They didn't knock on the front door of the house. They just came to the back door. So she saw the car go up there, and then she saw the car leave a few minutes later. So did somebody knock on the door that said, Clyde's been in an accident, come
Right.
with us, we'll take you to him? Or
Right.
did they say, Miss Rose needs you, let's
Right.
take you right now? Something.
Right.
Somehow it seems reasonable. Now, there's not a fact because we weren't there,
Right.
but it seems reasonable that she got into the car of somebody she knew, and that's how the story happened. Another thing about Burks is he had two personal bodyguards. One bodyguard was named John Norris. That was his personal bodyguard. John Norris would have drove his cars. He also had what we would call today a fleet of black Cadillacs, but it was probably 4 or 5, that he drove at different times, and so did people in his employee. So if you saw a big black Cadillac going down the road of Camden, you thought it was either Mr. Berg or it was the Burks, okay? So that's a point to remember. Another point to remember is there was under one of his buildings, there was like a garage underneath where they parked the cars. So you had to go down into the garage. And 35 years later, an employee admitted that one of his cars had been parked there, and when they saw it, there was blood all over the back seat. But the car had mysteriously disappeared, okay, within those first 2 weeks.
Right.
So again, that's all circumstantial,
Right.
but this is what people came about and said. Now, nobody said anything in 1957. Nobody said anything till not even in 1969 when Claude died. Claude, like I said, had a lot of problems. And so when people would say, what happened to Maud, Claude? He'd go, I don't know, but I think she's going to be home real soon. That's what he'd say. He'd say, I think she's going to be home real soon. Well, I'm looking for her. He said, she knows where I'm at. She's going to be home real soon. And it was very sad. And he died in 1969. A few months after he died, the court did petition to have Miss Maud declared legally dead. However, here's a sad thing. Because Maud's body was never found,
Right.
because they don't know if she's dead or not, Clyde is buried alone without her name even on a tombstone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there's no tombstone. There's no nothing. And
Well, she just disappeared.
just like she never existed. They had no children. And some of the things that Miss Maud did, though, that we will remember her for is I always want to look at how, there's a lot of people that have had a lot of bad things happen over the years, okay? And of course, right now we're used to the internet and Google and all that stuff,
Right.
and we know everything about everybody, but you just didn't back then. And even in 1957, you just didn't. But there's been a lot of people even before her that just disappeared and who will never know the truth
Right.
of it. But one thing Miss Maud did, not having children and not leaving that in this world, she left the mark of the things she did for her city. She was on all kinds of civic boards. She was on the women's auxiliary board for the Rotary Club, because at that time you couldn't be in the Rotary if you were a woman, but she was the head of the auxiliary board. She was head of several charity boards. She did charity drives all the time. And she also knew a lot about Arkansas politics, because here her friend John McClellan is senator. So she had a lot of connections with Arkansas politics at the time. And so about a few years had gone by when she was a lawyer, and they had started Arkansas Boys State. And it was a program that the governor at that time started. And what it was, for high school boys that could apply, if they were accepted, they would go spend a week in Little Rock and learn how Arkansas government worked, okay? Now it's evolved to some other things, but that's really what it started as. So after about 3 years of that happening, she said, well, we need to have one for girls. And everyone thought that was just out of the ordinary. And Girls State back then was a little bit, she was one of the founders of it. She was a counselor in it for about 6 years, until the summer of 1957. She'd been, every year they'd had it, but of course in summer of 1957 she was gone already. So and yes, they did teach them about Arkansas government, but they also taught them how to throw a formal tea party, that kind of thing.
Right.
So she would take them, and they got to see the governor's mansion, and they got to see the Capitol and that sort of thing. But she would spend a week in Little Rock with these girls every year at Arkansas Girls State. And so she's a big founder of that, and she was always one of the counselors. So she did leave her mark in Arkansas. She is someone we need to remember. She did make a difference. So she ends up disappearing, though. And the first thought that everyone had was, at that time, you have to always, when you look at an event in history, why did that happen? Don't think one-sided, think in a box, think all kinds of sides. So what they came up with was, well, surely, because Senator John L. McClellan was in the Senate at the time, he was working with different senators on mob labor things, like I'm talking about Jimmy Hoffa kind of thing, okay? He was investigating the mafia and the mob and families that were involved in labor disputes. So the easiest conclusion to button this up so they didn't have to investigate anymore was saying, well, she was in his law firm back here in Camden. Obviously, the mob kidnapped her, killed her to torment him, which doesn't even really make that much sense.
It doesn't, but you never know it, and nobody knows.
You never know. So it put a button on it where they didn't have to look into it anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And I always think, as I was researching, I thought, what if she hadn't been a woman? What if she had been Mike Berg that disappeared? It wouldn't have been a 2-week search. It would have been till we found it.
Right.
Yes. So, but being a woman in 1957 was a lot different.
Well, not only, she was confronting him about the business practices, if you will, that he was doing to get the money, the inheritance, if you will, right? And then so he was, according to what you found, is he actually would have his mom sign saying she's given such property to a coworker or something, and then that coworker would sign it back over to him. So she was confronting him about the ethics, if you will, I guess.
Yes, because it took a smart lawyer to figure out what was going on.
Right.
Because as she was keeping up, and also it's very interesting, as she was starting to go, wait a minute, where's this going? Where's this property going?
Right.
Mike Berg took her to court and claimed that Maud was stealing her money. And she wasn't stealing nothing.
That was just to deface her.
That was that was to make her look bad and to keep people off from looking at him.
Right.
And actually it was thrown out of court. So
yeah, I think I'm not saying in my I'm going to say non-professional opinion, I don't think he did it, but I think he had something to do with it.
He had something to do with everything that happened in Camden at the time. Yes,
you had the sheriff. You had a sheriff that rented from him. You had the city as a glove.
Yes.
So you just pulled the string in it. But I still think that somebody that she knew came to that back door, and so the back door was left unlocked.
Yes. Oh,
so,
yes.
Yeah. See,
and all the lights in the house are on.
I'm not even in my again unprofessional opinion. I'm not going to go with that. She. It was an emergency kind of thing. I think it was relaxed. Whoever she left with, it was relaxed, and she. But you never know.
You never know. And so when she disappeared, her husband, like I said, looked for him herself. And if he had been a man of not in his condition, he may have done something different. But that's what he did. And so all the town was like, where's Miss Maud? Because she was known as Miss Maud to everybody.
And they're still that way.
Everybody. And the girls at Arkansas State used to call her Aunt Maud even. And she never had any children. So that had to be rewarding for her. But so after the neighbors all looked, finally they were like, we've got to do something. And they said, so the local police said, okay, when they said we're not going to look anymore after 2 weeks, they decided to finally make a reward poster. The reward poster is just kind of pitiful. And it has a picture of her, and it has her description of her age and that she wore glasses and she was 65 years old and her height and all that on it. And it offered a $1,000 reward. Well, even in 1957, though, that's not enough to say something that might get you disappeared.
Correct.
And that wasn't a lot to work with.
The sheriff put that up, you said?
The sheriff did from the, extra funds. He said extra funds from the police department. Which
he rented, again, a house from.
Yes. Okay. So $1,000, that's all it was, $1,000. And nobody said anything. Right. Nobody came forward. Nobody said anything. There is still copies of this reward poster that you can find and see. It has a picture of her on it, but it doesn't give any reason why. And so it just all kind of faded into memory. And then, of course, when Clyde died, people just had her declared dead, and they're done with it.
That's crazy.
It really is crazy. And so her house is still on Clifton Street in Camden. And like I said, if you look at it, you can even look at Clifton Street. I looked at it on Google Earth. You can turn and look across the street. You see a gray and white house is where Miss Rose lived. Right. So you can see the window that this lady looked out of. There is a private person that lives there now. They own it, but they do have pictures of Miss Maud up in there. They sometimes give tours. They sometimes will tell about it. And so there's just all kinds of names involved here. So let me throw out some of these names that people would know. Governor Orville Farbus. We can all remember him from the Central High crisis, right? Governor Farbus was the one that shut down Little Rock public schools for a year because he didn't want to immigrate schools. And that's where the president had to bring in, we'll have to talk about that sometime, but where the president had to bring in the National Guard. But it's called the lost year of Little Rock. And and kids actually could not go to school at all. And it's very strange. As we all went through the pandemic and kids were learning at home, they would actually broadcast things on TV. Oh, wow. Your math class and stuff would be on TV. Yeah. So they were doing at-home learning before anybody knew what it was. But it was called the last year, but it was because the immigration law had been passed federally, and Governor Farbus said, no, we're not going to do it here. So anyway, that's what he's famous for. But one of his main contributors to his election campaign was Mr. Mike Burke. Okay. So in reward to being a big contributor, Mike wanted to be on the Arkansas State Police Commission Board. Oh. Now, he was not anything about law enforcement. In fact, Mike dropped out of school in the 8th grade. He was very uneducated. And his mother told him, you have enough money, you don't have to be educated. So he was uneducated. He ran all these businesses, had all these employees, but he had no reason to be on the state police board unless he was wanting to have state police people in his pocket almost. And he was there for about 7 years. Well, no, he was there for longer than that. He was there from the 50s up until 1975 when he died. He just kept getting reappointed. Now, commission board in Arkansas, all the commission boards, but the Arkansas State Board, Commission Board too, they are appointed by the governor. Okay, if you're going to be on this, you have to be appointed by the governor. I know this because I happen to be a director or a commissioner. But it's the same kind of thing. So you have to put in your name, and then the governor picks and appoints you. And probably you have 3 or 4 year term, and then you have to be appointed again. So he's on the state police board, the same one they burned up and lost all that evidence, the same one that pulled that curious police officer off the case. He's a commissioner there. Right. So anyway, so So we got Governor Farbus, which is a famous name involved in this. Then you've got Senator John McClellan, who, you know, we have McClellan High School in Little Rock and that sort of thing. He worked with Robert Kennedy on this labor dispute that had ties with the mafia before Robert Kennedy was killed. So it was a pretty high-profile case that he was involved in. It was in all the newspapers and that sort of thing. And I was looking, I had a picture of it, but So if you talked about Camden, you always talked about John McClellan. You always talked about him, and you always talked how he was doing so much in the Senate. So like I said, back then it was easy just to say it had to have happened. Something had to happen then, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because she wasn't like his family or anything. She was somebody he worked with at a law firm that he hadn't been in. At that time, he was still a member of the law firm, but he was inactive because he'd been in Washington like 4 years at the time. So it kind of made sense, but not so much. So we get to...
So is there a tie? Sorry.
Yeah,
is there a tie between... Is it Berg or Burke?
Berg. B-E-R-G.
Berg. Is there a tie between Berg and that senator guy?
Well, the only thing is, like I said, he was a very prominent customer of that law firm. So
that's why I'm thinking that the senator is more. If you had to pick sides, just again, not just my opinion, if you had to pick sides, it would be between them, you know, Maud and Berg. He would line up with her because they're in the same building.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So I kind of, in my 2 cents, you know, I think he's innocent.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, he wouldn't. It just didn't even make sense. The whole thing. So, and we'll get back to more of that, but let me tell you the last governor that's kind of involved in this situation, and that's Governor Dale Bumpers. Now, Dale Bumpers was governor back in the late 70s, okay? Probably, I think his last year was like 78, so probably 8 years for that, so early 70s to the late 70s, he was Governor Dale Bumpers. Well, anyway, so right before Berg died in 1975, he needed to be reappointed to the commissioner board again, the State Police Commission Board. And so, again, it was Dale Bumpers' choice. So Dale Bumpers is at the mansion in Little Rock, and he gets this gift. Well, now, Berg's known for giving gifts. He gives gifts to all kinds of people everywhere. That was his signature thing to do. And if he bought you a very expensive gift, he always left the price tag on it. He liked to give away these black Cadillacs. He liked to give away Rolex watches. But he gave even simpler gifts to, like, they'd say he'd go into a diner in Camden and he might bring flowers for the waitresses or something. He gave gifts everywhere he went, and that's what he was known for. So Dale Bumpers is up there reviewing over what he needs to look at and deciding who's going to be on this state police board.
Right.
And he gets a gift, and it comes in an unmarked box. Didn't see who it was before he opened it. Now we wouldn't open a box like that, but back in the 70s, he opened this box. It had a note from Mike Berg and said, I appreciate you if you would reappoint me to the Arkansas State Board of Commission. And it had a nice Rolex watch. I'm talking about in the 70s. $800 was on the price tag still.
That's a lot for the 70s.
That's a lot for a Rolex in the 70s. That's a lot. So Dale Bumpers made a point to send it back and said, I will not accept this gift. And no gift is necessary. I would not accept this gift. Well, and the story goes that it made him furious, and that he wanted to assassinate Governor Bumpers. And this assassination plan got back to the governor's office. So then the governor got the state police involved, and he sent out a declaration that said, if anyone in my cabinet, my family, or myself is hurt, look at Mike Berg. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he really put it all out there because because again, Mike had a reputation of doing these things. And so it was in January of 1975 when Governor David Pryor then replaced him. Now, this is January of 1975. Berg died in 1975. He died in November of 75, and this is January of 75. So he had not been on the board for just a little bit when he died. An interesting thing I found, I am an Arkansas professional historian. So I kind of go off and find what were these people really like. If we're going to talk about Mike Berg in relation to any of this, let's find out who he was.
There you go.
Of course, he was the son, and I believe the only son of his parents, and his dad and his uncle, like I said, had started this business, and they were Jewish. And I found in a book that talked about the Jewish population of around El Dorado and Camden in that time. There is a cemetery there called Temple Bethiel Cemetery. Tempe Bethel Cemetery in Camden that he is buried at. He is buried in. And so is his family. Berg. I'm talking about Berg. And a lot of the Berg family is buried there, okay? Just after all, still being buried there. So they were a Jewish family. Maud was not a Jewish person, but they were a Jewish family. And so, and what's interesting now is the Jewish population was very big back then in this area of Arkansas. And now when I looked up the demographics of it at this point, the Bergs are the only one left in that area that are of Jewish faith in that area. So that's just that was interesting to me.
What's interesting to me is that she's not on a tombstone anywhere. It's like she's just erased.
Well, because Clyde didn't have a lot of money after Ma was gone, and he didn't think about, and nobody stood up and said, you know what? She's my aunt, or she's my mama, or she's my grandma. There was nobody to do that, so she just got her forgotten. So where did
her estate and everything go?
Just to Clyde, and he just lived off it until he died.
And then where did it go after that?
Well, he sold the house before he died because like I said, he needed everything she had. And here's a very strange thing. She disappeared in March. Okay. This is another thing that made Clyde look really guilty. I'm not even saying Clyde wasn't really guilty. Okay. Because Clyde and Mike Bergs were friends and known friends. Okay. So everyone goes, how did he do this to his friend's wife? Okay. But again, Clyde was known to be a very nice guy. And like I said, he was dealing with a lot of his stuff. So maybe he's friends with everybody. I don't know. I don't want to judge Clyde. Right. But she disappeared in March. The end of April, Clyde decided to sell Maud's car, which, not 6 weeks later, he's selling her car. Right. He sold her car to somebody, and when they went through her car, the new owners, they found a receipt. And it was a receipt from the day she died from the grocery store where she had bought the beans. And so it's not really a clue, but it's kind of a tie back to what she was doing that day. And so now they're saying, like, when she left her office, she went to the grocery store and bought the beans home, started a time. That was what she planned to do. And she'd also talked to her cousin a little bit on the phone while she was doing that. But she said, I got to get off the phone. I'm going to watch TV, and I'm going to do these beans, and I'm going to go to bed before Clyde comes back. And Clyde said it was her habit to he didn't come home until he watched it's funny if you think about it, but he went to a movie. He went to Carter's Liquor Store. Carter's Liquor Store had on the 10 o'clock news, and Clyde would watch the 10 o'clock news and drink a beer with the people in the liquor store. Then it was his habit to come home. So it was closer to 11 when he got home every night. He's been spotted at the liquor store, so he's got alibis. This was an all-the-time thing. Yes, and he was at the liquor store. Yes.
And then again, this is small-town Arkansas.
Small-town Arkansas. So, but this was his habit every night. And her habit, though, was to turn off all the lights and lock all the doors before he came home. So when he rolled up in the driveway and all the lights are on and the dog's just like, we don't know where she's at, that's where he thought, well, what's going on? But he still didn't go look for her until 1 o'clock in the morning. But again, like I said, he was dealing with a lot of things. So we don't want to judge why he did what he did.
Right.
But
it's
at least
still
he did
kind of
that.
weird he didn't talk to the police. It's kind of like a policeman on the corner. Hey, my wife's missing.
Yes, or call the police station or something.
Yeah.
I also found that she was put into what they call the International Center for Unidentified and Missing Person. And she has a number, which is 746 DFAR, which is a number assigned to a missing person. Okay, so again, she's memorialized in this at least. And it does say her birthday is June 22nd, 1891. I made a mistake earlier, but 1891. She was 65 when she disappeared. She's a white female. She was 5'5", so she wasn't very tall. She was 165 pounds. She had gray hair with reddish hues. She had blue eyes. Her nickname and her alias was Miss Maud. Everybody called her that. She also had very fair skin with freckles because she had originally been a redhead, so she had freckles. So this went out, and it also said she wore eyeglasses. So this, again, is a thing that, and they put a little summary up on their website of her disappearance. So she is memorialized there for that. But it's just a sad situation. Yeah. And so my thing as a historian, I do get a little involved with these things I research, okay?
Right.
So I think that all of us who don't know that much about this, I don't want to speculate.
Right.
I will tell you the speculation here in a minute of where we think the body might be.
Right.
But I think if I could sit down and have tea at Miss Maud's house, I think my opinion of what I've learned about her, I would think she would want us to more just understand what she did and why she did what she did instead of worry about where her last remains are. Right. And so not having a tombstone, not having a memorial, I have a little button that says I love dead people. I love to talk to dead people. And so I think we can honor her and her memory by just honoring what she did and not getting caught up in where she might be now. Right. Because it hasn't meant a lot to a lot of people for a long time, which is very sad.
Just the older generation.
And so now I want to talk a little bit about Beth Briscoe. Beth Briscoe was an actress. She had many bit parts on different things like Bonanza and stuff like that. She was from Camden. She grew up in Camden. She came back, she had an agent in California. And she told her agent about the story of Miss Maud missing. Now, this was 1986. And her agent said, you know what? That sounds like a good movie. That'd be a good screenplay. And so Beth decided, well, I'm going to go back to Camden. I'm going to talk to people, and I'm going to write a screenplay about this. Well, she didn't really, I think she may have wrote a screenplay. It never became a movie, but she did write 4 books on the subject. So in 1986, she comes back, and she starts just asking people. And she said she could not believe it's 30-something years later and people still would not talk to her.
Oh, goodness.
And they would say, we can't talk about that. Or we're not going to talk about that. And, of course, the Bergs were still there, very powerful in the town. They still are. And so in 1986, she took her story to the Arkansas Gazette. The Arkansas Gazette was the longest-running newspaper this side of the Mississippi until 1991, okay? So I have heard this reported, and this is a big deal to me because I love the Arkansas Gazette, and I actually worked there, and I had family work there. So it's a big deal to me to clarify it was the Arkansas Gazette, not the Arkansas Democrat Gazette.
Gotcha.
Okay. 1991, they were bought, and they were put together. And then the Arkansas Gazette died after, because it had started in 1819.
Oh, wow.
In the Arkansas Post, yes. Wow. So about Mr. William Woodruff, again, another dead person I talked to. So anyway, so the Arkansas Gazette, the Pattersons ran it then. They're the people that ran it at the end too. And they said, this sounds real interesting. So they told Beth, write some articles. So in 1986, she wrote 18 articles that over a period of about 6 months were printed on the front page, like every Sunday, a little bit more about the story of Miss Maud. Okay.
Oh, okay. Kind of
a little
like
bit more.
Little story.
Just like a little story and different people she tried to interview and what they might have said and that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
It ended up to be 18 articles. Well, the Bergs said they were going to sue the paper. The Pattersons got death threats. Beth got death threats. There was legal action threatening all that. But, the Gazette said, we're going to keep printing them. And they printed all of them. Since then, she has taken those articles and made a book out of them. And she's wrote 4 books on this subject. She wrote 1 book, I believe, is just the interviews. She would transcribe the interviews of people she would talk to. So you got to kind of look at the whole big picture and put it together. And so not being a historian, she's just connecting the dots, okay? Right. And so her connection of the dots is she firmly believes that Mike Bergs had something to do with this. She does not believe that he was actually there, and many people don't believe he was actually there. He was a germophobic person even back in the 1950s. When him and his mother traveled, they brought their own linens to hotels. Mike Bergs was known to always wear gloves. He wouldn't shake your hand. He wouldn't touch a doorknob. He wouldn't do anything. So he was a big germophobic. So they're like, we don't think he was around anybody getting killed. But the story with John, his bodyguard, John Norris, his only thing he ever said was at 2:00 that morning on the night or the March 2nd, so it would have been March 3rd, the morning of March 3rd, he gets a call from Mike that says, I need you to come out to my property and fill in a well. Now, this well was right at the edge of the lake, which is Lake Berg is what it's called. So so he gets out of bed, because this is how powerful this man was. He said he got out of bed, went out there, filled in the well with cement.
Right.
Okay. So since then, of course, the lake's moved a little bit, and from what I understand, the well is kind of covered over with water, but it's still there, and it's still filled with cement. So Beth believes from her research that they killed Maud, and they took her and put her dead body in this well, and they filled it up with cement that very morning.
Right.
And that's what she believes happened. So this well being on the Bergs property could not be investigated because it is still on the Bergs property. Okay. So all these years later, it's still there. And so there is a grandson named Mike Berg, of Mike Berg. His grandson also goes by Mike. And so Beth said that she had written home letters, and she'd asked the prosecuting attorneys, and she's asked for all the police to help her to somehow get something that says they have to go into that well and find her. And nobody will help her.
No, it's not going to happen.
Well, that's what she says. So, yeah. So
Small town Arkansas?
Yes.
Yeah,
what is your take on what happened?
So my take is, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to pinpoint anything, but I do feel like that Mike had something to do with it. He just didn't do it. And being a germaphobe sounds like he had nothing to do with it. He just, if this is just my opinion, he signed a check and it was done.
Yeah.
And that was like, maybe, he was, whoever did it was on the payroll. Whoever did it's probably dead now.
Yes.
This is one of those you'll never find out unless, and I think the only way to hush it up is to get into the well, and if she's not there, then she, I don't know. But if she's there, then that solves the mystery.
Well, that's what Beth says, that if we could just find it out, put it to bed for once and for all.
Right.
But I kind of look at it like this. We need to pay respect to Miss Maud.
Right.
And would that be her highest priority, would be to get her out of that well? I don't think it would.
I agree with you. I think she would rather us remember what she's accomplished and what she's done versus how she passed.
Yes. I printed out, there's a picture of her on the internet. It's a headshot. I have like a 5x7 of this headshot, and she goes up in my office at my house. I have a research office in my house. That's not my primary job, but just in my office, I have her and Woodruff, yes, yeah. William Woodruff. Yeah. I have Ashley, Charles Ashley. I have just all kinds of people up there that I have touched and researched them at some point, because that's a sign of respect, I believe. When I walk in and I can say, good morning, Miss Maud, maybe somebody's going to find your story out today. But you know what? If I had a granddaughter or a daughter at Arkansas State, I'd be just as proud as I could be to know that Miss Maud had something to do with that.
Right.
So that's where I think that we need to focus more than trying to get semen out of a well.
Yeah. Because
it's not like if she had family standing there or a granddaughter needed to have closure or whatever, that's different. She doesn't. Yeah. And because if whoever would like to get her out of the well, put up a tombstone first, and then we'll talk about the well. You know what I'm saying? It needs to be a memorial to her. So that's just my personal opinion after researching all this. I'd love to hear from people what their personal opinion might be on it. But again, this is all speculative. Nobody's saying that Mike Berg or the Berg family had anything to do with it. That is the conclusion that has been jumped to.
Right.
And so we really don't know.
And I'm not ruling out her husband either. I don't know. I mean, because the way the lights were on, that the back door was unlocked, the dog wasn't startled.
You never know.
You never know.
And it could have even been maybe an accident. I mean, if we're going to spin a tale, we can spin a tale.
And honestly, if she's not in that concrete thing, then what?
Yeah. then what? Yes, exactly. Then what have you done?
Right.
And
But to me,
there's
the
legends that
simple
she
fact-
was abducted by aliens.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's one of the ones I found too.
The thing with me is if she's not in there, then what? But if she is in there, then what?
Then what? Exactly.
I think honestly, the family, if somebody must know, or they would let them in there.
Well, they might, because that's a point too. Because she said, "Wouldn't you want to clear your grandfather's name?" But maybe they don't think they have any reason to, and that's their prerogative too. You know,
I don't know. If I was in the family, just me, and I was innocent, didn't know there was something there, say, sure, dig it up, go ahead, let's solve this right here now.
Or you dig it up on your own and not tell anybody to see what you found. You know, maybe that, and then tell people.
I just wonder. I don't know. You never know.
You never know, and then the conclusion we want to jump to as human beings is, if they don't want to know, if they're not trying, then they're guilty, or that's not the only body buried there. You know, that could be a point.
I didn't even think about that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's true too.
Yeah. So maybe she's just one of many.
There you go. I didn't think about that. And again, we're just speculating.
We're speculating. But small town Camden, 1950s.
Right.
The man ran the town.
That's right.
And if you came against him, well, you just didn't come against him.
Yeah, you
just didn't.
There could be more than one body in the well.
But imagine what a powerful professional woman this woman was.
That's right.
She was like,
and she
I
went
love
to the
my
face
friend.
of it. That's right.
I don't care what you're doing. I'm gonna do what's right.
Right.
And so for that reason, that's why I think she ought to be, if you Google strong historical Arkansas women, she ought to come up.
Right.
If you want to know about being a woman lawyer in Arkansas, you ought to study her and know her story.
Right.
Because she came over all these obstacles to be where she was. And then she wasn't dumb. She knew what confronting him might bring her. She wasn't dumb.
Yeah, but I mean,
People in Camden knew this. They were all under the influence of this.
Right.
So it wasn't like she just did this on a whim. She felt so strong and so passionate about it that she was like, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to do what's right.
Yeah.
And that's what that's what my takeaway from her story is. And that's what I'd like our listeners to take away the story. Instead of going down to make it up some kind of, we don't know. We weren't there. None of us were there. Everybody was there is dead. That's
I'm still kind of laughing in my mind about the Arkansas bar. You just passed the bar, and this is not a test necessarily. Mm-hmm. That's where the test name came from, is the bar. Mm-hmm. So would you be willing for people to email you anything about this?
I would love to. I would love to have a conversation about it anywhere.
Tell them your email address again.
My email is Arkansas, all spelled out, ARKANSAS, and then Amy, AMY, and then at outlook.com.
Okay.
And yes, I'd love to know someone else's research, or have a conversation, or even sit down and have a small groups conversation with somebody. I've done that many times. So that would be great. But
all right.